The topic that we're going to be discussing today is how to fuel revenue growth through win-loss analysis. And so we've got a couple of experts here joining us to help us talk through this. Before I intro them, I'll tell you all just a little bit about myself and the community. So I'm Matt Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of about 15,000 folks in revenue operations. We have a whole lot of programs we offer for our members. If you're not already a member, I'll drop a link in the chat. We offer free membership options so any and everybody can join. And we are also hosting our annual conference next year, which will be in early May in New Orleans. So if you want to come hang out with 350 revenue operators in a fun, awesome city like New Orleans, you can do that, revopsaf.revopscoop.com, and I'll drop that link in there as well. But we are not here to just talk about that. Like I said, we're here to talk about win-loss analysis. And so with me, I have Spencer Dent, who is the co-founder of Clozd, and I have Paul Stevens, who is a director of revenue operations, who has a whole lot of experience on the win-loss side. And so, Spencer, I'll turn it over to you to get started, and I'll start to share my screen. I'll turn this into slideshow mode. But Spencer, over to you to get us rolling here.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Matt. This is excited to do this. Obviously, super excited to talk with Paul. Always great to talk with folks that you've worked with on this challenge and gone through a lot together. A little bit more about Clozd, so those of you, and maybe me in particular, that makes me relevant to this audience. My background experience, I've worked in sales or functions of sales for a long time. I went to business school at Duke, and after business school, I worked at Bain in their commercial excellence practice. So how do you scale up your sales orgs? And I worked with a lot of different companies doing that. And I was the first. Back then, they didn't really have a RevOps function. It's really evolved. I was the first sales operations external hire to a company called Qualtrics that when I joined them, they had 300 employees, and I was there for a few years and had to deal with everything that is RevOps. So it's super cool to have an organization like this that you can go to and get resources and insight from, because I feel like 10 years ago that didn't exist and you were blind going into it. So have a ton of empathy for this role, a ton of empathy for the challenges you deal with, and super excited to talk about this one challenge that oftentimes gets maybe not squarely put on the plate of RevOps. Sometimes it's other teams, but definitely part of it hits all of you. So that's me in a nutshell, but Paul's way more cool than I am and way more interesting. So go ahead, man.
Yeah, Paul Stevens. I live in Charlotte, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and been doing RevOps or sales ops and RevOps for over 10 years now. And I work for a company called Datacor. We're a software company where we're primarily focused in the process manufacturing space. So that's manufacturers that make stuff from a recipe, like food and beverage or chemicals, oil and gas, that sort of thing. Datacor we're a family of companies. We're the anti-private equity, where PE wants to flip you in 2 years for a profit. We look for companies that complement our overall offering and buy and hold for the long term and integrate them into the family. And so from a RevOps perspective, it's really interesting because we grow maybe 50% through organic growth and 50% through acquisitions. And so always something new, always hard problems to solve as we're going through these integrations. And our family of companies is in various stages of the integration process, some fully integrated to at the other end of the spectrum operating as they did before the acquisition happened. Lots of need for good data and good insights, which is why we're talking today, so that we can make good decisions with all the chaos going on out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do want to point out, I know, guys, we talked about, this is also not RevOps or win-loss related. We talked about baseball in our dry run last week. And I just want to say, I called it, Spencer, your Padres are doing great. Paul, your Tigers are doing great. I think I called the fact that my Brewers were going to be like one and done, and that the Mets, I'm telling you, the Mets are going all the way, at least to the World Series. I'm not going to say they're going to win it all, but that's my prediction. They're up on the Phillies right now.
This is being recorded, so we can go back and fact check
exactly.
in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. I like it. They look pretty hot. The Mets look pretty hot. It's good.
All right. Awesome. So take that hot streak, and I guess let's maybe first talk about how to get started with win-loss here, Spencer.
Yes, I love that. I love this from the perspective that you bring, Paul, because the impetus and like kind of the jumping off point for companies to get into win-loss kind of depends. there tends to be some type of event or issue where it's, we don't understand what's happening. We have to go figure it out. I remember for us when I was at Qualtrics, and what pulled me into this space and eventually starting this company was we had one certain competitor that we just couldn't figure out how to beat them. We didn't understand why we could win and lose. For you at Datacor, what was the tipping point that got you guys started with thinking we need to do this more thoroughly or differently than we have in the past?
Yeah, and that was definitely a part of it. You're always looking for little insights as to why you can't beat your toughest competitors. But for us, we had a very specific question that we wanted to have answered. Over the last couple of years, just like a lot of companies out there, we're seeing a general rise in prices in the market. And Datacor was doing the exact same thing. We were testing the market to see if we could normalize our prices to make sure that we weren't leaving money on the table, but that also we weren't raising prices to a level that was going to be disruptive to our customers to where they're going to have a bad experience. And obviously, we're having conversations with these guys. We know what they're telling us as we're meeting, but quite frankly, it's an emotional topic. And we know that there was a lot that wasn't said, a lot of information that we didn't hear back. And so the question that we were trying to answer was, are we pricing effectively? Are the conversations that we're having productive and leading to a good experience or a negative experience? And we realized that we really needed a third-party perspective on this. John, our CRO, and I had used a win-loss service before, or win-loss company before. As we tested the market, we found Clozd and really what they brought to the table in terms of technology and their process. So we basically engaged with Clozd to talk with our customers that had gone through a price increase discussion to figure out how those were going, how they're feeling afterwards, and if we can glean any insights from that. So it was really that specific question that we were trying to get at.
Yeah, got it. So you guys get started and you're okay. We've procured a third party. Were there other key things at the very beginning to make this successful that you did up front as you were setting up and strategizing around it that were keys to making it work?
Yeah, a couple of things. So number one, it's my experience that you never want to do this stuff in a bubble, right? People start questioning your motives. They question whether or not you're doing this for the right thing. So we announced this as an initiative at our sales kickoff in February, that this is another tool in your tool belt. We're going to implement win-loss analysis to figure out why we're winning and why we're losing. And here's why you should support us. It's going to help us get better. It's going to help bubble up the issues that you're seeing that in a different format. So it's really just shining a light on what we're doing and why we're doing it. But the other thing was getting as wide as possible in the organization. So not just keeping it within sales, but engaging other groups like marketing, of course, and product and the executive team. So making sure that everybody knew what this program was and some of the things that we were getting out of it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to be over communicative and then share the info as we're getting it, share some of the insights that we're getting. What we found is that we started with one business unit. And once the sales leaders of the other business units learn what they were getting from this program, they wanted to be next in line. And so we ended up with a waiting list of, okay, we'll get to you, but we've got 2 people in front of you. And so rather than this being something of a big brother inspection, micromanaging, we really wanted to communicate what we were actually going to use it for, which was getting data that you can't get out of CRM, or getting data that our customer wouldn't tell us ordinarily.
Yeah, I love it. I think you nailed something that's really important. There's kind of 2 parties when you're sitting in a RevOps chair and you're owning this, that you have to get bought in. First, the sales team. Your point about the witch hunt, that will kill a program. It will kill your ability to get it, because what will happen is reps they'll come up with every reason why you can't reach out to their accounts, or you'll need to get contact information from them and things like that, and they will just shut it down. And one of the ways that I think is, it's funny, like Clozd has hundreds of customers now, and it is very rare that we come back doing win-loss and say, your sales team is just a disaster and all these people don't know what they're doing. In fact, that almost never happens. What more often happens is there's issues with your messaging. There are actual product gaps or issues in your solution, or issues in how you're pricing, that if you can fix those, your sales team is going to win more. And when the sales team actually internalizes that and understands that, they become your best champions and line up and say, I need more of this because it's going to help me, because it allows you to do the second part that I think was awesome that you did, is get everybody else involved, because there's so much you learn in win-loss that doesn't apply just to sales. In fact, in some of our clients, sales doesn't own it. other companies own it, or other parts of the company own it. So couple things here. You're going to see some screenshots that we're going to run through here. We're going to give you this piece of content after we get off at the end of this. It's a big piece of content. It's pretty heavy, but if you're thinking about this, first thing you want to make sure you do, make sure you secure executive and cross-functional buy-in. Make sure that the people in your organization that matter are going to be able to have this information. Second, start with the data you already have in place. So this is an interesting thing. And I think we're going to cover this in a second, but sometimes you start doing this and you realize you don't have all the deals that are actually going through your pipeline in play because your reps aren't recording them. And so we're just going to wait 9 months until we get compliance, and then we'll start with what you have and use that info that you have because it will help you. And then the third thing here is choose your feedback channels. Let me ask you this question, Paul. As you think about, you guys are mainly doing interviews. Why? There's different ways that you can engage buyers, right? Oftentimes I find that RevOps folks lean more heavily initially. Their gut instinct is, I should go survey buyers. What channels do you use and why?
You mean specifically for the program that we have in place here at Datacor?
Yeah.
So we went with the interviews versus a survey because we wanted a broader breadth of information. We didn't want a binary yes or no or this or that. We really wanted to understand the true sentiment of the conversations that Clozd was having with our customers and be able to use that as a starting point to communicate internally. Spencer, they mentioned this. Weren't you working on a project to address this? Like, here's another data point to help with that. And so for us, it was just getting that access to not just the yeses and the nos and the whys, but how they sounded during the interview. Were they really emotional about this particular thing? Or were they really annoyed that we didn't listen to them when they kept saying X? And that's just gold. And so it made the program that much more valuable because you could really understand how the person's feeling, not just what they're deciding to click on a button on a screen.
Totally. And it's an interesting thing. And it's always like a question that I would ask myself if I was running a RevOps team and I was responsible for this is, what kind of feedback am I looking to get from these buyers? And what is the nature of the deal that I sold to them? Example, in this case, I really want to understand sentiment. You should definitely do a live interview. And if you aren't going to do a live interview, you should do some type of asynchronous video. I ask a question and you can just record your own video back, like that app Marco Polo. That's a great way to get depth. If it is, to your point, Paul, I just want to test the temperature. Surveys are good for testing the temperature, but there's trade-offs across all of these channels. And what we find is the clients that use those in-depth channel, the in-depth live interview channel, they get richer feedback, but they tend to be able to cover fewer deals because of the economics of it. So you can also mix and match channels. So that's a great thing to be thinking about. And there's a lot of content around that we're not going to get too academic right now with you and going into the details on it. But as you think of scaling up your program and trying different things, pretty awesome to know that there's different tools in your toolkit to go after those folks. Okay, so you're running.
A couple of questions on that.
Yeah,
Spencer, actually, that we have. And the first one, Paul, is probably for you, but Spencer, also for you. So thinking about, like, Paul, you obviously have multiple companies in in the portfolio. So I guess the question for Melanie is, do you have multiple products across those companies? And then how do you decide where you should start? And when you decide where you should start, how do you think of, do you just start with the wins? Do you just start with the losses? Do you start doing them both at the same time? So that's the first question for Melanie, is when you think about multiple products and then wins and losses, should you do all of it all at once, or should you pick a place to start? And how should someone think about that?
Yeah, great question. Definitely have different products. So different business units are their own unique product. So Datacor, for example, is ERP. We have Format Solutions that does ERP, but for the animal feed space. Trackabout does container tracking for returnable cylinders. And then we have two simulation products, ChemStations and AFT, that do simulation to make sure that chemicals don't explode and that as you're building piping, that is as efficient as it should be. How we decided to start with the business unit that we did was because we had that, we were getting feedback from the folks at that business unit that pricing may be an issue. And so we wanted some qualitative data from a third party to validate that. How we decided what was next up in line just depends on what the biggest priority is. So the one that we moved on into after our first initial business unit was our most recently acquired company. So how are our customers feeling about working with AFT since they've been acquired by Datacor? The third one after that was around Datacor ERP. So how are things going? We have some competitors that keep popping up in the market. How did our customers feel about us versus them? So getting that traditional win-loss feedback. And the third part of that question is, what do you start with? You've got to do both wins and losses, in my opinion. If you focus on one versus another, you're either going to get nothing but good news or nothing but bad news and false positives on either side. And so you've got to take that mix to get a full perspective of what the universe looks like.
Yeah, makes sense. And what, I guess, for both of you, Spencer and Paul, can you share some samples or examples of good quality questions to ask during the interviews that you mentioned? And I don't know if this differs depending on, again, wins versus losses, but if you have 1, 2, max of 3, what are some great questions to ask during the interview process?
Yeah. One thing I'm definitely going to answer that. I'm just going to echo and reiterate what Paul said about doing wins and losses. So often the losses are like visceral and emotional and people love them because it's like the gossip, but they don't give you the full story. And the whole reason you're doing this is to understand your recipe for winning so that you can go repeat it and scale your business out, right? What has to happen for us to win repeatedly so that we can increase our win rate? So definitely do both. I think that's super important. And I think Paul's strategy for how you guys have started and run there is beautiful. Start small and then grow from there. That's what you want to do. When it comes to what questions to ask, I would say this. Think about the problem you're trying to solve. If the example is, I want to understand pricing, think about how do you ask those questions, right? What exactly do you want to understand about pricing? If you want to understand the sales experience, think about what questions you want to ask around that. If you want to understand product feedback, think about what questions you want to ask around the product feedback. The key is this, though. If you're interviewing, the best interviews actually might be a 30-minute conversation and you're only asking about 10 questions because they're talking a lot and they're sharing a lot. And what you want to think about when you're doing these interviews is you want to think about asking really broad, open-ended questions to start with that forces them to start talking, because as they start talking, they will share more and there will be a more emotion. And what will happen is you'll be able to key off of what they're saying and how they're saying it, where to double click. So for example, the pricing model is just confusing, right? Then you can jump into it and really try to figure that out and make sure that that you're nailing it. So really think hard about that, but general guidelines, open questions, and then have specific drill downs if certain topics come up.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one more question for you before we move on. Mohan was asking specifically, can you give a real life example of a nugget that you found doing these interviews, again, whether it was on the win or the loss side, that you don't think would have been possible through surveys? So again, like the question of like surveys versus interviews, like do you have an example of a nugget that you got through the interview process that just would not have been possible through?
Yeah, totally. The one was just a comment that one of our new customers said in passing. So this was a success story. It was a win. And he just happened to mention that there was something during the handoff between sales and implementation that he was expecting something and the actual result was something different. And it led us to basically jump on that and say, okay, this is an opportunity for us to get better and fix what this particular issue was. Feedback's a gift, right? So you want to take that and make sure that you're taking something that was just a throwaway comment and using it to make your process a little bit better. And then some more concrete examples. We had some losses where we would stack our products up 1-to-1 with our competitors, and we would find that maybe we lost because we didn't have this functionality. And that would inform our future acquisition strategies. Maybe we need to go look for a company that does this so that we can plug them into that. And now we're more competitive as a platform. Or this particular product doesn't have the ability to do this, dev or product. Let's focus some resources on that because it sounds like we're losing deals over and over because we're not able to do this particular thing. So those are the kinds of things that actually our project manager at Clozd he bubbles up to us on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to say, hey, here's some things that you guys really need to focus on. And we delegate those to the right people who get into the plan and make sure that we're getting better from that.
The one thing I would add to that's a great answer. The one thing I would add to that, prior to Clozd, I worked at Qualtrics. Qualtrics is like the leading survey company in the world. And we couldn't get to the right answers with our own product. And the reason why is it's a great question, Mohan, because when I think about surveys, you think, man, I should be able to design a survey that can get to anything. The first challenge you're going to run into is B2B buyers will not fill them out. You'll get like if you're a low single digit participation rate, no, that's very normal. The second thing is B2B decisions are often incredibly complex and there's lots of people involved and lots of nuances. So it's really hard to design a survey form to encapsulate it. So even if you could get them to fill it out, you might not be able to adapt the way you need to. When you think of surveys for win-loss, I would think about them very much as they need to be simple and easy, and they tend to shift and drift more towards very transactional deals. Like it was an easy deal. It didn't take a lot of time to sell. It was probably 2 calls. And I just want to know, quick temperature check. The second your deal sizes start to be $5,000 to $10,000 plus, I would suggest you start looking at other mediums like a video-based asynchronous interview or a live interview to collect the feedback, because of all of those nuances that you won't be able to uncover the nuggets through a form.
And I guess on that, another question that popped up as a follow-on to that. So you mentioned before, Spencer, right? Everyone, is very interested in hearing feedback from closed loss customers, right? Like you said, that's the gossip, right? But actually getting that feedback or executing on it seems hard, right? If you close a deal with a customer, now you have a relationship, right? Like you're doing things together, right? If someone's decided not to work with you, it's like
It's a great question.
Like a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? Are you going to be sending these like text messages and not getting responses, right? So how do you approach those prospects to conduct a closed loss sort of interview? Like any best practice?
Yeah, great question. A couple things that I'll tell you here that are really important. One, it is nice to use a third party. Obviously, I own a company that's a third party company, but I'm just telling you, it's easier to have somebody go talk to someone that broke up with you than to go try to talk to them yourself. So the third party can soften it a bit, or at least somebody in your organization that appears to be neutral, that appears to be comfortable to speak with. Because if it feels like it's going to be, there's going to be tension, or it's going to, it's going to be like, I don't want to tell you that your baby's ugly. I don't want to tell you that your sales rep blew it, or I don't want to tell you that your product it doesn't even stack up. That's going to be awkward for me, but a third party makes that easier, or at least somebody in your organization that appears to be neutral and open. So that's one thing that you can do to get the closed loss. The other thing I will tell you, the second, and I have a third, the second is timing matters. And how quickly you reach out to them after the deal is marked as closed lost matters. It's the single biggest factor that of all the things that we've done, how we reach out to them, how much we incentivize them, everything else. The single biggest factor by a factor of 5 is how quickly do you reach out to them after the deal is marked as lost. So that leads to automating and making sure, and I'd love to ask Paul here. I'll tell the third one, and then I want to ask Paul like how his process for getting it running and how he uses it. But within Clozd, we try to automate that. So we can plug into your CRM, you can write rules and say, we want these deals to be interviewed, these deals to be surveyed, these deals to be video-based interviews, and automatically kick off these workflows in a seamless process so that you don't have to go chase the rep down and chase this down and chase that down, because we know that timing matters a ton. And then the third thing I mentioned is incentives do work, right? So when you reach out to somebody pretty quickly after a deal is marked as lost and you say, hey, we really value your feedback. Hey, we engaged a third party to help get feedback from you because we want to make sure that we're always improving. And in appreciation for your time, we're going to give you $100 as in a gift card or to a charity of your choice. You start to see hit rates more in like the 20% range. So I would think of that as that's how you get the losses. We haven't talked much about this. Churn customers that were your customers that have left, you can also go to them. And it's a similar thing where that third party works. To the point that you made, Matt, if wins will talk to you, but even still, wins do feel a little more comfortable at times talking to a third party if there was stuff that they would like to improve. But Paul, talking about that, getting after it quickly, what's your process for making sure that deals get closed and we reach out to them as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so from the sales pipeline side, we're meeting all the time, going through pipeline, making sure that ops that are dead or off track get closed loss, that they're getting into the queue. And then what we do is once a week, a report goes out from Salesforce showing all the wins and losses over the past 7 days. And then we actually have somebody wonderful, Janelle, who's on the call today, who goes through these and works with the sales leaders to determine whether or not a win or a loss warrants an interview. So that's how we keep the engine going. Once we graduated from going business unit by business unit, like start with company A, then move to company B, as we're approaching steady state, now we're looking at all the different business units, which interviews make the most sense to get into the queue. So that's how we're selecting the ones that make sense to have interviews. The other thing that we found that really bumped up that hit rate that you mentioned, Spencer, was we start with a call or an email from the salesperson. So even when we lose, our customers have known these people for 2, 4, even 6 months sometimes. It's not like they're a stranger off the street. And just being honest with them. Hey, Matt, we're always trying to get better here at Datacor. Really appreciate it if you could spend 45 minutes talking with Spencer. They might give you $100 to a charity or something like that if you're interested, but just want to, we take this seriously and it would mean a lot if you did that. And we saw the hit rates go like double or triple what they usually would just by a personalized invitation from the seller that worked that deal. So I would highly encourage that because we all get a million emails every day. So just having a preface that once you get an email from Clozd, take it seriously and try to connect with them. That goes a long way toward increasing your hit rates.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just like setting the stage and the expectation. Because like you said, your team's not working with these people on just one 30-minute call, right? Like you've had multiple interactions over many weeks, many months. And so there's a relationship there, right? But yeah, just setting the stage beforehand so that it's now not a random email that they weren't expecting to get. Now it's an expected message that they know is coming. Totally makes complete sense and why you'd see some of the results that you saw there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's awesome.
So we talked a little bit about how to get started. And I know we've hit on a bunch of specifics on running the program as well. But Spencer, let's talk a little bit about that and how to best run the most efficient and effective program that we can.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for Paul. You got started, right? Here's background to that. I think is valuable for the folks that are listening in. When people approach win-loss as a project, they don't actually end up solving the problems often. They go do this feedback loop and then they don't continue it. And then they go take actions and they don't know if those actions are actually driving changes in the business. So doing continuous win-loss is actually the best way to have a pulse on how you're doing. So Paul, you get started, you get your initial feedback. How do you turn this into an ongoing operational muscle and capability in your work?
Yeah, I mentioned our pipeline reviews. That's something we talk about every time we review our wins and our losses. The first question usually is, have you sent this to Clozd or should we send this to Clozd to get more information on? So it's almost just we look at it as an extension of our sales process at this point. We start with an initial question. How are we doing in terms of pricing? We answer that, we move on to the next one. And now we're in steady state where it's, all right, let's keep this going. Let's see what other nuggets of insight we can bubble up. And then we have a meeting every 1 or 2 weeks with our project manager from Clozd. And he always comes to the table with a couple of pieces of insight. Hey, it would be really important for you to take a look at this because I think you mentioned this before. Here's another example where the customer is talking about that. And then continuously sharing the results and getting wider in the organization. So once the word got out about Clozd in the past couple of weeks, I had our head of biz dev, who I think is on this call as well. He reached out wanting access to the platform so that his team can read the wins and the losses really to see what makes Datacor great. What are the things our customers are talking about over and over again? And how do we turn that into a better script for our outbound BDRs? Our marketing team is going to use this as a source for customer stories and reference management. Our product team is always gleaning this for how we can make the product better. And so once you're getting into that steady state, it's making sure that you don't have any blind spots, expanding it out to more people at the company that can use it, and just continuing to use it as an extension of your sales process.
Yeah, I think one thing that you mentioned there that's really getting the motion going is you have to build. There's two parts to this. We got to go collect the data, then we got to go process and share the insights.
Yeah.
And the way you get a lot of momentum, I think you nailed it, is more and more people will start to engage with it, and they will have different perspectives on it. Like, one of my favorite things I've seen is Gong's a customer of Clozd, and the heaviest users of Gong at Gong of Clozd is the product team. The product team loves it. They're all over it. And you think, wait, these guys, wouldn't sales always be? They love it too, but having the product team, they weren't the initial buyers of it, but they are all over it. So this idea that it should be held closely to the chest by whoever's running it and then shared out in QPRs, I actually think is a really dangerous idea for your company. You want to move fast. And by sharing it broadly, what will happen is you'll get the feedback in front of people who are thinking about this stuff all day. If I'm a product marketing manager at your company, I'm thinking about messaging all day, every day. And so when I get this feedback, I can see, are the things we're doing working or not working? And then I can immediately adjust. There's nothing worse than we've been doing win-loss and I have no idea about it, like what customers are saying. You feel like you've been waiting forever. So a couple of things here that I think are this automated motion of regularly we're continually feeding the feedback flow. This idea of analyzing it and sharing it at scale is super important. One other point, there was a question, follow-up question about who should do the interviews. This is why having it be as neutral of an individual, often a third party, works, because it will be easier to ingest. If the product team does the interviews and comes back and says the sales team is not good, the sales team is going to say, what? We all know that. And if the sales team does it and comes back and says the product's garbage, the product team is going to say, we know what. But as long as it's the most neutral party as possible that can ask questions in the most objective way as possible, you'll get the best feedback that will help drive this adoption going forward.
Do you have examples of like specific, again, like roles or functions, Spencer, that could be like, if you're not using a third party, that internally could be a neutral person?
Yeah. So in some of our clients, the competitive intelligence person will actually run it. So we actually have some clients who license our software and run the programs themselves on our software and don't use us as a third party interviewer. And a competitive intelligence person, a product marketing person, we've seen like a chief of staff or strategy, people on the strategy team, strategy operations for the organization. They've been able to do it. The title doesn't matter as much as how that person sits in the org and how they're viewed by their peers and others as to whether or not they are trusted. And I think that's a really key thing, because we've seen that backfire on people before, where it's like, we did it, but nobody did anything because they didn't believe anything that came out of it. And so you really need to make sure you have somebody who's trusted. And another thing I would tell you that helps with that, this is sometimes counterintuitive, because people like to put their fingerprints on stuff as it goes through the process. Oh, we got this thing. I'm going to take it and turn it into a deck, or I'm going to take it and shape it in some way. The more you just share it broadly like with people without looking like you're changing or anything, like just giving the audio of the conversation, the better off you're going to be, because those types of things provide more trust and confidence in what's being said, that nothing's being shifted or shaped to drive a narrative versus just giving the raw feedback from customers. But sometimes you do need to do that, but I would tell people to be careful about it.
Yeah, totally agree. We don't try to filter it through a particular lens. We give everybody access to the data as it is, because otherwise you're going to hamstring yourself and you're going to prevent yourself from seeing a much broader perspective. With people that are outside of the sales and marketing space are going to look at an interview in a completely different way as a sales guy. I think the more people, the more eyes, the more inputs that you have in it, the better interpretation you're going to get of what to do.
Yeah, totally. Makes sense. And I know in the last bucket we're talking about here on realizing the value, we hit on this a little bit before. I can't remember, Spencer, if it was you or Paul, but right, win-loss is not like you said, it's not a project, right? Like that kind of implies it's this one-time thing. It's a program, it's a motion, right? Like Paul, you mentioned, it's part of your sales process now. And I think that's one of the great ways that folks can actually realize value from a program and a motion like this. But Spencer, why don't you get us started so we can spend the next 10, 15 minutes on this of like how to, now that you've gotten started, you're running the efficient program, you've worked through some of those kinks, how do you make sure you're seeing success and value on
Yeah.
the other end?
Yeah. A lot of that starts out with just some parts of it's hard to attribute because you learn things about your product and then you go change your product and hopefully that helps lift your win rate. The best thing you can do is don't change your opportunity criteria for creating opportunities in your CRM. Just make sure that there's fidelity in tracking opportunities and track your win rate and see what happens to your win rate over time and see if it changes and how it changes. Now, there's a lot of things that can influence that, but I would first start with that in terms of thinking about how to realize value. But there's other things that are just like very simple things that help you get value out of the win-loss program. One is about 1 in 10 deals that are a loss actually end up being a hot lead of this. I chose not to go with you guys and I'm back in the market. I'm ready to go. Or my budget got cut, but then we just freed some stuff up and I'm ready to go. And there's things like that. Or you find at-risk customers. So there's lots of value. One of the simple kind of business cases often is just like, what's your average deal size and how many deals would you have to win how many more deals would you have to win in order to justify running this program? And that math tends to be really simple for a lot of companies, but the best sources of value I find are the actual stories from customers because our customers find stuff in win-loss that is amazing. And it's probably better for Paul to share this, but you guys have been doing this for a little bit now. What have been the biggest aha value moments for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's exactly what you said, getting those customer stories. And in a way, everybody on this call has a win-loss program. It's just not a very good one. It's sellers going into Salesforce and marking their ops as close lost, and then picking from a drop down of 10 to God knows how many options of what he or she thinks is the primary reason. And sometimes you have multiple loss reasons. So trying to figure out which out of the 3 fits nicely into Salesforce. And so the value for us was we're making decisions off of this information. Sellers aren't data entry specialists. Sellers are there to close deals, manage relationships, right? The stuff that they're good at. Salesforce is important, but it's always going to be an afterthought. And so if we're making decisions based off of imperfect data, decisions where we're spending money in some cases, the risk is that we could make the wrong decision because maybe the seller always selects price because that one makes the most sense, or product because they didn't want to talk about something else. And I don't think that sellers are doing a bad job. I think they're doing the best that they can. But the value for us was actually getting the qualitative data, the conversations behind why we're winning or losing so that we could use that to make good business decisions. The other story, some of the examples I shared around some of the hiccups in our process or areas in the product where we needed to go invest, that's all fed from the conversations. The value really is having something other than a field in Salesforce that's literally the last thing the seller fills out before a deal goes close lost.
Yeah, I love that. The idea, if I were to add, I would say the speed of the decisions goes up. Yeah. It's super rare that we come in and tell some company here's all this stuff that's going on. And they're like, I had no idea. When that happens, you're like, I don't know who's running this ship, but we better watch out. We're going to hit an iceberg pretty soon here. But a lot of times we come in and we'll tell you 5 things. 3 or 4 of them we're confirming stuff you already know, but we're actually just helping you put the right weighting on them. These 4 things are going on. These 2 actually really matter, and I would focus on them most importantly. And then there's this 5th thing. And what that does for you as a company is say, okay, let's get behind these 2 things and go knock them out. And then the next 2 pop up or something else comes up. But it's that the ability to make decisions and make them quickly with confidence because you're getting that feedback loop about what you need to go change instead of closing your eyes and firing at a target and hoping that it sticks. I think that's a great way of summarizing the value.
Yeah, I think most people are going to look at their wins and losses as part of a metrics package at the end of the quarter. So it could be 90 days since an opportunity has gone lost. Whereas in this program, you get emailed on notifications automatically as soon as an interview is published, and you can get all the data and interpret it, make decisions off of it within a really short amount of time.
Yeah, totally. So there's a ton of value. Like this next slide that we have here, if you're interested to see different ways that companies get value, there's a whole bunch of case studies that you can go see.
I guess two questions. So one, go back to the beginning was, and Paul, I guess you've been there before, but say you're in a spot where you don't have, I guess to Paul's point, everyone has some sort of win-loss program today. It's just a matter of how bad or good is it, right? So let's say your win-loss program today is you have a closed loss pick list or open text field on the opportunity record that reps can fill in and complete. Right. And that's the extent of what you're doing for your closed loss and your win-loss program. If that's where you're starting from and you want to improve, what's the next step? How should folks look at starting down this journey and maybe maturing their program? What are the steps that someone should take?
Yeah, I think there was a great visual, maybe the second or third slide in at the very beginning of this presentation. You start with the data that you have available. So you get your RevOps people together and you analyze, why are we winning? Why are we losing? You're looking at the industries, the revenue bands of those companies where you're winning and losing in to try and figure out what the story is. What is the data telling you? How do you interpret it? The second thing, and this is just getting back to what I said at the beginning, is that you never do this stuff in a bubble, right? The less mystery that you can insert into RevOps, the more public you make it, the more cross-functional you make it, the better information you're going to have and the better buy-in you're going to get. And so you get a cross-functional team together with sales, marketing, product, whoever needs to be a part of it, and say, guys, this is what the common themes I'm seeing from our wins and losses across these product groups. How confident do we feel about this? Where do we need to press into? Where do we need more information around? And then it grows naturally from there until you're at a point where you can say, all right, now we have specific questions that we want to go answer because we're seeing some of this stuff in the data. We're getting stories back from the field from sellers that say that this is always happening. Now that we've got qualitative and quantitative, let's go prove that with something like Clozd to see what our customers are actually saying, because the truth is going to be in between those three things. Yeah. So it starts with data, it expands into the cross-functional group, and then it keeps going until you get into a professional win-loss program.
Yeah, I love it. There's a great piece of content that we have. If you want it, you can go download it off our website. It's called The State of Win-Loss. It's a study we do of hundreds of companies, thousands of companies that are running win-loss programs that are different levels of maturity and kind of the value they see. And exactly what Paul just laid out. 8 years ago when we started this company, most companies were like, I'm doing something with my CRM and talking to my reps. And most companies have matured beyond that and said, I'm not getting the right level of feedback from my reps. And they're right, because I'm going to tell you this is going to be the hot nugget of the day for you. When we go look at what reps say in the CRM and we compare it to what buyers say across all of our clients as to why they lost a deal, 85% of the time it's wrong. 85% of the time. And when we look at who they marked as a competitor versus who the buyer said was the competitor, 60% of the time it's wrong. So it's not the rep's fault that we force them to fill out information that they don't know. It is their fault if they do know and they lie, and that might happen too. But sometimes we're forcing this and then we get mad at the outcome. But the way this maturity curve looks is very much how Paul talked about it. It starts down here with, we need to know this. And it starts with getting some buyer feedback and then expanding it to more buyer feedback and expanding the group of people who are engaging with the feedback. And ultimately, the companies that get the biggest increases in their win rates are doing ongoing cross-functional programs that are as automated as much as possible. And those are the companies that get the most value. So definitely a lot of the stuff we've talked here, if you guys can scan this QR code, you can get this piece of content and it will walk through it. But everybody's on a journey. So depending upon where you're at, this is a good document for you. That state of win-loss report is also a good document for you to see where you're at and start moving up. But you can move pretty quickly too. Paul, you guys have moved pretty fast.
Yeah. I think we started in December of last year and we were getting actionable insights within a couple of weeks. And we had it operationalized by January where we got into a really good rhythm. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It just takes that initial buy-in of, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's what we expect from you, and here's all the good stuff that's going to come out of this. So that's what takes the most. It's just getting your org ready for something like this.
Yep. Totally agree.
Makes sense. And think about, to your point before, Spencer, about the like the data typically being wrong, right? 85% of the time it's wrong. We ask for the data for a reason, right? Like we want to know why we win and why we lose because we can make better business decisions going forward with that information. That's why we ask for the data. It's just how we go about collecting it is typically wrong, right? If you're relying on the rep to input a value to your opportunity record, Spencer has the data that shows 85% of the time that will be wrong. That means if you're looking at 100 closed loss deals, only 15 of them are actually accurate, right? So wouldn't you like that to be a higher accuracy rate, right? That's where a formal kind of structured program can really help. So you can make the product improvements, you can make your sales improvements, you can make your pricing improvements, you can learn all those one or two things that you mentioned that aren't maybe you're even aware of right now, right? That's the value. And so I know we're coming up on time. So I guess Spencer and Paul, just ask you guys like any closing remarks for the folks that are here in terms of one or two kind of main takeaways, advice you were to give on kind of win-loss for folks.
You go first, Paul.
Yeah, I think first is embrace your losses because there's good stuff that can come out of losses if you're honest with yourself about it. I was thinking about this quote I love as I was thinking about this call that we're doing today. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. So losses are going to happen. No one's going to have a 100% success rate, but if you can learn something that helps you win more down the road, then it makes it worth it and it gets you better. So I would say lean into it. Don't be afraid of it. It's not Big Brother. And it's going to make sellers a better seller, and it's going to make executive teams better informed as to how things are going and how they're performing.
Totally echo that. Totally. I would say this is game film for your organization.
Yeah.
This is how you understand through the wins and the losses. This is how you understand how you win more. And if you approach it that way, everybody in the organization should be willing to line up against it. Everybody should be willing to line up against it and do what it takes to do the right thing for the company. And it's actually one of the most beautiful, simple things you can do in a company to just put a bright light on what needs to happen because it's coming directly from your buyer. It's hard to fight and push back on that. One thing I'll say specifically to RevOps professionals is this. We at Clozd work with lots of different companies, and we've been doing this for a long time, and we've seen an increase, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, of this being owned by RevOps. Sometimes it's not owned by RevOps. Sometimes it's owned within marketing by like a product marketing team. Sometimes it's been owned by like a strategy team. Sometimes it's been owned by even a product team, the product team doing churn interviews on down funnel wins and losses. What we're seeing is more and more RevOps teams own and adopt this. And the reason why is you folks are the very best people in your organization typically at operationalizing things. And so what happens is it might start in product marketing, but product marketing can't figure out how to set it up and automate it without the support of RevOps to integrate with your CRM and to make sure that you're in touch with your other sales tool stack, all that stuff. So more and more, we're seeing RevOps own it. And what we see is when RevOps own it, it becomes more of an operational exercise, basically what Paul is talking about, that actually drives continuous improvement in the business. And so if I'm a RevOps person, I definitely want to have my hands on this because it is some of the most strategic work you can do. And you folks are the best position to drive it in your org in that continuous, ongoing, automated, cross-functional way. Like you are the best position to do that most often. So that's the piece of advice I would give people is take advantage of it because it can be a huge lift to your organization, but frankly, it can be pretty meaningful to you to get that seat at the table of this person that's at the heart of driving your win rate and helping the company succeed.
Yeah, 100%. You brought up Gong before as a closed customer. Think about Gong and call recordings for as you go throughout the sales process, how rich that is in terms of like knowledge and information about whether a deal's likely to close or not close. Same thing on the flip side of that. Think of how like when you win or lose a deal, how valuable the feedback is that you can get from those customers or prospects. And if you build that into your motion, it becomes part of your culture. And then it's no longer I don't know, pointing fingers or sales saying it's a product issue or product saying it's a sales issue. It's just the issue. So, Spencer, Paul, thank you for dropping some knowledge and kind of sharing everything that you did today. For all the attendees out there, thank you for joining. When you log off of Zoom, you'll be prompted with a 2-question survey. We're not going to do interviews here like we would if we were running a win-loss program. Please fill that out. Let us know what you thought about the session today. But with that, I'll let you all run. Take it easy and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.